Hello, Fine Time listeners. It's Kevin, and it's just me today. I told Steve and Andre I wanted to do a show about Tony Hawk games this week, and they're like, we don't really play Tony Hawk. So I said, okay, I've wanted to do a show about UFOs for a while. Let's do that. And then they called me a crackpot. So I said, you know what, you guys, take a fucking hike. GTFO. Smell you later. So I brought in a different guest, Mick West. He happens to know a little bit about Tony Hawk. He was one of the 3 original founders of Neversoft Entertainment and the lead programmer on the first 5 Tony Hawk games. As it just so happens, Mick is also the most high-profile UFO debunker in modern UFOlogy, having appeared on networks such as CNN, CBS, and BBC to discuss the issue, as well as numerous high-profile podcasts. So while he was around, I quizzed him up on that topic as well. I really have wanted to do a show about UFOs for a while, and I just wasn't sure of the angle to do this at, so I'm very appreciative to have had Mick on. In the interest of not wasting his time and being able to maximize my time with him, I've purposefully avoided spending any time providing background or context to some of the topics that were discussed that listeners might not be familiar with. So in the show description, I have provided a number of links to items related to this discussion if you're interested in any further research. So yeah, enjoy the show. Before we get started, Mick, I want to say thanks for coming on the show, and I feel like it's often a formality on these shows that you say, thanks for your time, but there was obviously no obligation in even responding when I asked, let alone actually taking the time for a little show. And not only, I think this will be, good for our show, and I care about Fine Time, but I'm genuinely interested in talking to you, so I truly appreciate you taking the time here.
Yeah, no worries. It's not often I get to talk about both Tony Hawk and UFOs.
Yeah, is this the first time?
Probably. Usually one of them gets mentioned a little bit in the other interviews, but well, let's see how it goes.
Right, perfect. So yeah, before we really get going, I'm wondering if you can give a little bit of background about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, well, I'm a retired video game programmer. I started programming video games way back in the 90s, I guess. No, I guess maybe kind of back in the 80s. Yeah, I guess the 80s, early 90s. Like back in the UK, started working like a very small companies back then, and then moved to America after a few years, just because like it seemed like a fun adventure and more money. And worked for a little bit in America and founded Neversoft. Where we did a variety of games that many people, the hardcore gamers might have heard of, like games like MDK. We did a conversion of MDK from the PC to the PlayStation. Games like Apocalypse, a couple of other small things. Skeleton Warriors was the first one we did. And then we kind of hit the gold mine by doing this Tony Hawk's Pro Skater game, which was very popular. A lot of fun to work on, a lot of fun to play. I did that for like 5 years or so, and then I kind of felt like doing something else, so I retired to start writing. I did like writing for Game Developer magazine. I was doing some freelance coding as well at the same time, and then that kind of grew into like writing about conspiracy theories. I kind of got interested in pseudoscience and conspiracy theories, started a couple of blogs on them, and then eventually my website, Metabunk, which is a discussion forum. And most recently, I've been really interested in kind of investigating UFO videos, in part because it's kind of like video game programming in reverse. It's the same kind of maths that you use for both types of things. So that's my potted history.
Perfect. I appreciate it. Well, specifically, I guess on the video game development side, I'm explicitly interested in talking about the Tony Hawk franchise, as I'm sure a lot of people are. Anytime I've heard you speak about your time in game development and the franchise, you come across as very humble, but there's no getting around the fact that the series was not only, critically acclaimed. If we look at the Metacritic Top 100 video games list, both 2, 3, and 4 are on there, famously 2 sitting at the number 2 spot to this day with a 98% reception, as well as, the enduring fan passion that's kind of went throughout the years. And I think it's fair to say you were definitely instrumental in the success of that, because everybody talks about, just how good those games feel to play, and the fact that they're just fun to play.
Yeah.
Even when you're not pursuing goals or given direction by the game. And that's always brought up by fans. So when you left that franchise, it was more or less at the peak of its popularity. And I'm curious how difficult of a decision it was to do that at the time. If there was some hesitancy because the thing that you were instrumental in building was so loved, or if at the time you were just kind of, I'm done, I need to move on to other things.
Yeah, I was kind of done. I'd been doing the same type of thing. It was a lot of fun at first because it was all very unknown. Like the first games, we had no idea how to make a skateboarding game, and some of the stuff is pretty clumsy in Tony Hawk 1, like the physics and stuff like that, and the tricks system was a lot more simplistic than in 2. And so it was like a really interesting learning process over the first few years. Like, first of all doing the first game and then kind of finessing it for Tony Hawk 2. And then kind of having to restart again for 3, because that was on the PlayStation 2. And then we did a couple more after that, and it just kind of started to get a little bit repetitive, and I felt like branching out and just doing something else. So it wasn't a hard decision. I mean, I would have been a lot richer had I stayed and carried on working on it. But then I would have to be continue working on the same thing, which would have been fine. But this is the road I went down, and here I am.
Worked out in the long run.
Indeed.
So back to the release of 1, I've got to ask, so the first game released on September 29th, 1999, and just a few months prior to that, Tony Hawk landed the world's first 900 at the 1999 X Games on June 27th. So I was in elementary school at the time, and I remember this explicitly being playground news, even up in my rural school in Canada. So it was definitely a pretty high profile topic for the sport. And I'm wondering if did that cause some hype around Neversoft at the time, or?
Yeah, well, in a couple of ways it did. I mean, one, just because it was such a big topic, the X Games, being on TV and everything, and just everyone, it was such a major event within the skate world, and also kind of like spread to the broader world as well. It's the first time this particular trick has been done, most amazing trick ever. It's like the 4-minute mile of skateboarding. And then we had like a little bit of work to do because the game was pretty much finished at that point, and we had to get a 900 into the game because we didn't actually have that. So of course, the 900 is one of Tony's special tricks, and it didn't take too much time. But when you've been working on a game and you're done, you don't want to add things to the game, because you add something, things get pushed around, you introduce new bugs, you can break things. So we had to kind of get this in, the most straightforward way possible, and then just do extensive testing to make sure we didn't break anything, and then ship it.
I suppose it would have seemed like a glaring omission if it wasn't in after that.
Oh yeah.
So you did the Tony Hawk Pro Skater podcast a couple of years ago, and you had kind of speculated on difficulties that series had, as it progressed in finding new mechanics to implement, because there was a number of major upgrade type mechanics that you guys had already done through the first number of games, right? The manual and the revert, the wall slap, getting off the board, all things that kind of made it easier to, extend your combos and have a little bit more flow. And I'm curious if there's a specific game you would identify where you feel like, implementing new and valuable mechanics started to be more of a struggle, or if you kind of look at, not saying that there was ever a sharp downturn, but if you look like it was all kind of, relatively rising up until maybe the Tony Hawk Ride era.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like things go up, things go down, and it's hard to pinpoint things exactly. I worked on the first 5 games. So the last game I worked on was Tony Hawk's Underground. And that was kind of a bit of a departure in that we emphasize the narrative of the game a lot more. And so it's kind of more about you as a character within this world, and you're going through a story. And I know a lot of people really like that. But my personal relationship with games is more about having fun mechanics and doing fun goals in the game. And I don't really, mind, don't really care too much for the story. Like if I want a great story, I'd watch a movie. And I know that's kind of like a bit of a contentious thing because a lot of games nowadays are really amazing narratives. You think of like the Last of Us, for example. It's the video game version of that game is got a compelling like narrative and video and interactions as well, just as the TV series does as well. So it's obviously a thing a lot of people like, but I'm kind of an old schooler. Like when I was young, like video games were these super simple things. Like, I started with Pong, obviously, like the very first video game, and then Space Invaders and Centipede and things like that. And for me, with Tony Hawk, the thing I love about it is just that flow of going through, a sequence of tricks and doing a line or, trying to get to a particular point or do a particular thing, like jump over a helicopter, whatever it is. And, I've always been someone who's found the kind of the cutscenes and everything to kind of get in the way, and I like to skip them. But like with the new mechanics, I think like in the earlier games, each mechanic was pretty revolutionary. Like, in the Tony Hawk 2, we had the manual, which was the big thing that you could, like before, you could only really extend your tricks by doing multiple grinds. And, so you'd have to start out in the half pipe and then grind somewhere and then do a bunch of things. And then we have the manual where you could actually, just, land in a manual. And then we had, in the subsequent games, we had the revert where you can flip around when you land and kind of land into a manual and continue the tricks that way. And these were quite revolutionary in terms of the actual gameplay. If you compare like 1 and 2, for example, they're very different games in that sense. But I think it got harder and harder to give a kind of a revolutionary upgrade. Things like the wall plant is just, it's using a wall to reverse a line. It's, it works, but it's not really the same kind of type of thing as the revert or the manual. And it's I don't know. I think like you kind of run out of steam eventually. You either have to kind of reinvent everything, or you can't really like just add little bits on to something. And, at the end, I think, of the Tony Hawk franchise, it was more about, getting these amazing worlds and nice narratives and everything. But the mechanics were kind of incremental changes rather than revolutionary changes. But you couldn't really do a revolutionary change because it would be a different game. And I think that's why some of the other games like Skate had success, because they were so different. The way the mechanics worked in Skate was very different to Tony Hawk. So it's not like you're just playing the same game in a different setting with a few new tricks. It's a completely different game.
Right. I guess until you get to the point where you make a large plastic skateboard to put in front of the TV.
Well, but the problem with that is that it didn't work. It wasn't a viable way of controlling the game. It was like a gimmick that seemed like a good idea, like many things in video games do, but it wasn't really going to work. There's lots of controllers that come out that are supposed to be like a better thing, but using gross body motions to control something that's really meant to be this direct, like brain to screen type thing, where there's as little like impediment as possible. I don't think it was ever really going to work. It certainly not work in the sense of it being the same type of game. It's like a fun balance game, like the Nintendo games with the balance board. But it's not a Tony Hawk's Pro Skater game.
No, I did notice when I looked at that Metacritic list that it didn't quite make the top 100. Though I will say I've got a little bit of a soft spot for Downhill Jam on the Wii, which you could probably make the same comparisons for, but for completely different reasons. I'm glad you brought up the first Underground game, because I think that game is still very highly thought of. But I have to ask, and actually, so just for a little bit of context, I played all of the first 6 games at the time that they were relevant, other than Underground 1. I just recently played Underground 1 for the first time. And I think for that game, the addition of vehicle-based goals was probably the most controversial aspect of that game, which I would agree with. It certainly wasn't, it didn't ruin the game by any stretch of the imagination, and you weren't required to do it that often. But I'm wondering if whether implementing that or not was a hot debate around Neversoft, and kind of what your personal thoughts were on the vehicles.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about the vehicles is the fun. They were programmed to be fun, like the kind of fun, floaty physics to a degree. You got that kind of like kind of doom buggy car. It's like there's a concert level. I think it's the Kiss concert. There's a big thing where you have to launch it, and it's just a fun thing to do. And it's the type of thing that a young kid might want to do, like play around in a doom buggy or like do jumps in a car. So culture-wise, it kind of fits, and game-wise, it fits in that it's a fun thing. And it's like why would you deny yourself having fun in a game if you can? And the whole point about Tony Hawk from the start was to try to make it somewhat of an open world. Like even in the first series, you've got levels like the school level where it's got a bunch of different areas you can go around and you can do things in different spots, and you choose where to go and you choose what to do, and you can make your own games. Like you could say, like, here's this rail and I want to try to just grind this rail all the way and then jump wall or something like that, and grinding those as well. You can make up your own goals, so having that freedom to do things. So if you're in a world and you've programmed the world and there's a car in it, why can't you get in that car and drive it? So it's not a skateboarding goal, but I mean, like a lot of the goals in Tony Hawk are not realistic. You're grinding along telephone lines, and you're jumping over helicopters, and you're doing all kinds of crazy stuff. You're in a foundry, like falling into lava, and it's a game. And if we can add more things that are fun, why not? As long as you're not taking away for something. And like you say, it's not like, it's not really detracting from the rest of the game. It's almost like it's an optional thing. Like all the goals are somewhat optional because you don't have to do all the goals.
Yeah, for sure. Perfect. So after leaving Neversoft, how long did you continue to play video games as a hobby, or was it kind of, I've had enough of that world?
No, I mean, I always played video games, but it's kind of dropped off after a while. I was more into kind of like first-person shooters, things like Half-Life and Halo, things like that. And I kind of got into kind of real-time strategy games like Warcraft, which I really enjoy that type of thing as well. But I haven't really played it so much recently. I've kind of lost interest in video games. I think it's because I'm busy doing other things. The only game I play on a regular basis now is Mario Kart, which I've been keeping up with over the years, and we've still got like the latest version. So I still really enjoy playing that.
Right. Did you do the Tony Hawk 1 and 2 remakes when they came out?
No, that was nothing to do with me. But the guys who did them did a really good job in kind of capturing the original essence of the game and the controls. I know a lot of people who liked playing the early games enjoy playing them again and more with the remakes 1+2.
Yeah, I've got my fingers crossed very hard that we see 3+4 after if the Microsoft Activision purchase goes through.
Yeah, that'll be interesting.
Do you, I guess, just as far as modern game design, do you have any overall thoughts about kind of how the industry has evolved, and specifically if that idea of just fun for fun's sake has been somewhat lost as a core design concept, or do you think it's growing well?
Well, I think you've got a very diverse game world out there now. Lots and lots of different types of games, so you can kind of pick and choose. And there are people doing indie games if you want to go all the way to that type of thing, like experimental games, weird abstract games. And then you've got your mainstream games still. You've still got like Call of Duty. Then you've got your kind of new games that have kind of new genres of games that have kind of grown over the last decade with the internet, like party games, battle royale games, Minecraft. So there's still new things coming along, but Minecraft obviously is a big open world. It's kind of almost the ultimate open world thing. You can do whatever you like to the world, and then there's other games like that. Fortnite is a constrained world, but you're still kind of free to do whatever you like in it. Yes. If you're not caring too much about the goals. And there's modes where you can play the game where you're just kicking around building stuff. I think game designers recognize that element of game design, like being the sandbox element, where you can just kind of do whatever you feel like doing, is a very valuable thing that people really enjoy. It's kind of like the history of video games to a degree comes out of arcade games, and arcade games had this design element which was focused around getting someone to put another quarter in. So you play a video game like Space Invaders, and you can play it for a certain amount of time because you got a certain amount of lives. But when you've actually bought a video game, and like Tony Hawk, there was some of that left over because we still had these 2-minute sessions in the first game. It's like every single thing you did was like 2 minutes, and that kind of like traces its history back to the roots of video games as arcade games, where you had limited time to do a goal. But later we changed that. I think it was in 3 actually that we did away with that initial time limit. Some goals still have time limits, and allow people the flexibility to roam around. I always remember when I showed my sister-in-law the game the first time, she picked it up and she immediately started like trying to do things as quickly as possible, doing tricks. And I was like, no, just calm down, just chillax, and just like go over there and talk to that guy and see what you want to do, or just go chill in the half pipe in the park. So yeah, it's an element of game that some people still like that time imperative, but I think a lot of people really like the sandbox element and the free world and the freedom to play the game your way.
Right. Yep, for sure. Before I move on from Tony Hawk, I've got to ask, every time I see a video of you at your desk, I always notice the birdhouse board sitting behind you. So I've got to ask if there's a story behind that, and if that was a gift from Tony himself, or kind of what significance it has.
So this deck here was given to all the members of the team after the completion of Tony Hawk 1. So Tony signed these and gave them to everybody who worked at Neversoft and some of the people at Activision who were working on the project. It's all signed, so it says here, "So Mick thanks Tony Hawk," but he did that for everyone, obviously. So everyone's got one of these. Since I wasn't very much of a skater, mine's still pristine. I think I rode it a little bit. The wheels are a little scuffed, but there's no grind marks or anything on it. So yeah, it's a pristine signed Tony Hawk deck from, I guess, 98 or something like that. So it's an antique.
That's very cool. Maybe it'll make its way to a museum someday.
Yeah, maybe.
So I guess I'm moving out of video games and more onto the conspiracy theory and debunking topics in general. I'm curious, we talked about your work in game development. I'm sure that 99% of the time, any reception you had was very positive. But then by nature, as you've moved into debunking, people hold those beliefs very closely as is apparent. So it's definitely not the case that's received well. And I'm curious if kind of that shift in how, what you have to put out there is perceived as difficult to deal with on a personal level. And then I guess if that kind of, if you ever, have a feeling of missing working in more of a creative capacity rather than a critical capacity.
Yeah. The things I'm doing are still fairly creative. Like I do coding, quite a bit of coding still. I create simulations of things. I do a lot of investigation that's kind of math heavy and lots of analysis. And then you've got to create a video explaining it. So that aspect of it is still pretty gratifying. I miss something of the team work of like the whole team of like 20 plus people working on a game. You can create bigger things when you have multiple people working on something full time. I do have other people kind of working with me on my forums and stuff like that, but it's not exactly the same. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's the. I was trying to think how to best put this. the creative side of it is still there, but like you were talking about, like the kind of the feedback that I get, and if you go to my YouTube page and look at my last video, and you go through the comments, there's hundreds of comments. 99% of them are very complimentary and very nice. So I'm still getting a lot of positive feedback. The negativity comes more on platforms like Twitter, which is just to be expected. I mean, you start amassing enough followers on Twitter, you're going to get people who dislike you, who disagree with you. And, that's fine. I mean, I understand why people disagree with me on things. A lot of people in, say, like the UFO community have got deeply personal beliefs on the subject, in part because they've had, some of them have had personal experiences. And a lot of people who believe the other conspiracy theories think that there's kind of a government shill organization where I'm being paid to debunk conspiracy theories. So from their perspective, they know they are right because they've done their research, and so they think that I must be lying to them. But I just try to be even-handed in my assessments of things, my investigations, and be polite and respectful to people. And most of the time, the majority of people are pretty nice.
So I guess just a little bit further to that reception, I think in those cases where people aren't nice, it's not surprising necessarily because, especially people that are prone to believe conspiracy theories, there's definitely that confirmation bias there. But I am sometimes surprised by, people that claim to be experts or professionals in those fields. I have seen people in various conspiracy theory groups, either go from like disregarding what you're saying to, being maybe you being verbally attacked behind your back kind of thing, or them having just negative commentary. And that does surprise me a little bit more, especially because, as you mentioned, it comes across that you put a lot of value on keeping those discussions respectful and objective. And it occurs to me that if somebody was trying to, purport themselves as an expert or try to prove the legitimacy of something, that they would at least want to give the impression that they're interested in engaging with well-structured critiques, to support their position. And I'm just wondering, I guess, if you have any thought on kind of how you're sometimes treated by some of those experts or professionals as they claim to be.
Well, I think people who are experts in one thing sometimes make the mistake of thinking it makes them experts in many other things as well. So people who are very smart or highly skilled, like, say, Commander David Fravor, they're very good at their jobs, and they're probably very good at other things as well. But it doesn't mean that they're going to be necessarily very good at, say, analyzing videos and doing reconstructions of the internal gimbals of the AppFlare system and things like that, because it's outside of their area of expertise. But that's kind of an understandable thing. Other people, it's going to be easy to say you're an expert on the internet. It's a harder thing to demonstrate that. I don't claim to be an expert. And this is something that I tell people a lot, is that, you're not believing me because I'm like this super genius. It's like Mick West says this, therefore it is so. That's not what I'm doing at all. What I'm doing is I'm attempting to demonstrate things. And I attempt to demonstrate things in a way that other people can verify. So I'll do things like, show that when you rotate a camera a certain way, it makes the glare rotate in a different way. That isn't something that you need a PhD in optics to understand. And it isn't something that I need a PhD in optics to be able to convey to people. So it's not an argument from authority. I'm not saying, I'm the expert, trust me. I'm saying, here is some information. But I think other people perhaps do rely a bit too much upon the credentials of either themselves or other people. And they will say, why should I trust you over X person who's got a PhD in whatever? And my answer to that is that you shouldn't have to trust either of us. You should be able to look at what we're both saying and see which one of these things is more correct than the other things. Can I verify what this guy is saying? Can I verify what this guy is saying? And if you can't understand what they're saying, look to other people's assessment of the same things, more neutral experts. So expertise and credentials are not as important as what people actually do and say and show.
Yeah, interesting. I think too, there's probably definitely an element of purposefully not putting in the effort to understand what you're trying to demonstrate. But I'll get into that in a little bit with a couple specific examples. So I've got to ask, as we talked about it, I think there's definitely, for a lot of conspiracy theorists, they have a complete, not necessarily complete, but definitely a lack of awareness as to how their bias is affecting how objectively they're looking at something. And I'm wondering if you think that it's possible, or if it happens that the inverse is true coming from a debunker perspective.
Sure.
If you think that there's even whether it be yourself or, the community as a whole, if there's times where you might look at a topic, especially ones that don't have a tangible way, or maybe, just because of the nature of what you're looking at, it's harder to demonstrate whether it's accurate or not, if there's just a natural bias, and sometimes possibly unfairly to assume it's not.
Yeah, I think that bias is always an issue. I mean, it's a human issue. Like, everyone has biases. You can't really approach anything without biases. It's a very difficult thing. You can kind of try to deliberately do it, but yeah, you have unconscious biases, and you have biases that are based on what you know. Just having a certain body of information will bias you towards that. Like, if you have if all you have is a hammer, then everything looks like a nail. You have the tools in your toolbox, and you tend to apply those tools. So when I see a video, a lot of the times I will go to explanations that I've seen before as my first thing, like, things like a balloon, for example, which, people laugh, but a lot of UFOs obviously are balloons. We see them all the time. We see these videos of things that look exactly like balloons. So, I definitely have biases. I also have biases from having done it for a long time and having got essentially the same results all the time. Like, if you investigate a UFO case, like, in my experience, it comes down to one of two things. Like, either there's just not enough information for you to figure out what's going on. It's dark. There's a twinkling light in the sky. It might be a star, it might be a helicopter, it might be a drone. But from this, whatever 10-second video that's all shaky, the guy running around, you just can't tell. So there's a whole bunch of cases like that. And then there's the cases that you can tell, where the video is good enough and you have enough information, and it's not a fake video. And those of all, in my experience, have turned out to be something pretty boring, pretty mundane. Like, yes, some of them are interesting. They're interesting in how you discover that it's a mundane thing, like an aircraft. Like various famous cases where there's been things that people couldn't figure out what it was, and then I go in there and do some analysis with help from other people and figure out it's an aircraft. And so you kind of get used to that happening. And so when a new video comes out, you think, there's nothing new. It's just another UFO video. It's going to fall into one of these two slots. It's either going to have not enough information, can't tell what's going on, or there's enough information we'll be able to figure out what it is. So it's going to end up being a bird or a plane or a light or something like that. And having that experience over and over again kind of leads me to expect that type of thing. So I also have to try, though, to keep an open mind, because there could be something new out there. There could be a new type of flying craft that I'm not familiar with, or it could be just something I'm unaware of, like a type of atmospheric phenomena or something like that I'm simply unaware of, or maybe even something new to science, which would be a lot of fun to discover. So you've always got to keep an open mind. Has
there ever been a time where you've seen something and, obviously it can't be demonstrated as something, paranormal necessarily or something like that, but where you would say that there is some evidence here that's compelling, at least, or generally does it always fall in those two buckets?
Yeah, I mean, not really. I mean, people ask me this all the time. Like, have you ever seen something you couldn't explain? And the answer, obviously, that is yes all the time. I see that. And then, have I seen anything I couldn't explain that's actually makes you think it might be an alien or some kind of advanced technology? And the answer to that is no, because all these things that seem like they're doing something, they either get explained or you just can't tell what's actually going on. In this particular video, whatever it is. So, no, there aren't really any great I mean, that's the thing. If there was, this would be what you would call like a black swan event. It would be like a novel and unexpected thing that has arrived that changes everything. And ufology is constantly searching for the black swan, the one swan that proves that, we think that all swans are white. All we need to prove that black swans exist is to find one black swan. Obviously, black swans do exist. They exist in Australia, but with UFOs, we've got this huge array of solved cases. But all you need is one case that can be demonstrated that it's doing something interesting, that it's actually, moving really fast, or it actually looks like a giant thing which is hovering, and then it zooms up into the sky, or it disappears, or teleports a cow up inside it, or something like that. If you actually have something doing that, that's all you need is that one, and then it's game over. You've proven it. You've won. That you won the argument about whether extraterrestrials are here or not, or whether something really strange is here or not. But we haven't got that. We've got loads of white swans, and we've got a bunch of what I call grey birds, which are these ambiguous things where you can't really tell what they actually are. So no.
I got to say, it would have been a great Find Time exclusive if you would have been like, well, look, there's actually this video, and I'm pretty sure it's aliens, and I've got it in my desk. I haven't showed anybody, but we'll break it out now. But if that's not the case, I guess that's unfortunate for us.
Sadly, no. I mean, I'd love to find one, but if it comes along, I'm not going to be the person who's pointing it out. It's going to be blown wide open to science. It's going to be congressional hearings.
Well, if you happen to be the one, feel free to bring it to us rather than CNN.
I will. You'll be the first to know.
Perfect. I've got to ask this question, and I was on the fence about asking it because I know it's incredibly wide scope, and it'd be difficult to really give a fair answer. But just given the internet's role in the rapid spread of disinformation about a number of topics in modern day, I'm wondering if you feel overall like the internet has had a net negative impact on society, or if, the value it adds, in addition to giving a platform to be able to dispute that information or disinformation, kind of outweighs the negatives. And if you have any overall thoughts on that.
It's difficult to say. I mean, I think there's lots of positives to the internet. Being able to communicate with anybody anywhere in the world for free with video, face-to-face video chat, and exchange information. You can send files and videos to people. It's like pretty amazing. You can work from home in ways that you could never work from home before. You can visit the doctor on the internet. There's all kinds of wonderful advantages. You can get it's easier to get a taxi now than it was back in the past. You just use your phone and order up an Uber or a Lyft or a taxi. So there's vast amounts of different advantages to the internet. And some of the disadvantages, it's almost hard to argue that they're disadvantages. Like one of the reasons we have more disinformation is the fragmentation of the major media. Like, say 20 years ago, you'd get your news from watching, ABC News or NBC News. Maybe 30 years ago, it's going back quite a ways now, or CNN or something like that. So there was like a limited number of information sources, and people would still read newspapers. That was a big way of getting news. And since not everyone could produce a newspaper, there was a more limited number of newspapers, and they get more money because they've kind of cornered the market. So they're able to pay the journalists more, and they could do these very detailed reportings and things like that. But with the breakdown of that, it's a democratization of information dissemination, which is kind of great because anybody can get information out there, and individuals can do investigations and blow things wide open and expose things or support things or whatever. So there's all these things that you can do now you couldn't do before. But because we don't have this kind of more neutral, authoritative source of like the evening news, Walter Cronkite type thing, telling you what's actually going on in a trustworthy manner, you've got all these different sources, and a lot of them are not trustworthy, and a lot of them are just kind of either doing it for for the money or because of some like ideological reason or for some kind of weird belief that they have. And it's very easy for people to get sucked into things, and things have the veneer of looking authoritative because it looks like a proper news outlet or something, but it could be like an outlet run by a cult or something like that. So yeah, there's lots of pros and there's lots of cons. And I think the important thing going forward is for people to be aware of these issues and for it to be part of our education in understanding how the internet works and how information works and how you check information and how you check your sources. And I think we're still a little bit in a transitional period where we kind of assume a little bit like, if it's on the news, it's correct. And people are saying, oh, we'll just, we'll let the news tell the story. But then really what's happening, we've got all these different sources and people are assuming things that are true that when they're not. And they haven't had the education to be able to discern things and to give the correct amount of skepticism to their sources. So it's an ongoing process.
Do you think in the time you have been working on debunking that you've felt like the general population's ability to dissect that information has got better or worse, or is it just kind of stayed as a through line?
Well, no, I think it varies because individuals vary, and there's a constant new wave of young people coming in. You think back 10 years ago, the people who were, six years old back then are now 16, and they're starting to get into this type of thing. 10-year-olds are now 20. Mm-hmm. There's always a constant stream of these fresh young minds that can get kind of messed up in various different ways. But people in general are more aware of certain things. You think back, like, say, 30 years ago when Photoshop first came out, it relatively quickly became a verb. To Photoshop something, and people would say, oh, that's not real. It's Photoshop, and so people would become aware that you can fake photos. And now people are becoming aware that you can fake videos, and you can fake audio, and you can fake other things as well. And so there is definitely an awareness of that type of thing. And also the media itself has become more aware of conspiracy theories. A lot of the time, they were just ignored and almost like allowed to fester. You look at YouTube 10 years ago, it was very different to YouTube right now. You go to YouTube 10 years ago, if you could go in a time machine and type in like chemtrails or flat earth, you'd get the top hits would be videos promoting those conspiracy theories. And now you get videos debunking it because they're aware that this is an issue, that disinformation spreads in that way. But again, that's an ongoing process with its own problems, because if you've got censorship, it drives the disinformation elsewhere. So now a lot of the people who are into that type of thing, they don't go to YouTube, they go to Rumble instead. They get their lightweight stuff on YouTube, but when they want their hardcore conspiracies, they go to Rumble, and there's no filter there, and so the same stuff is going on there.
Right. I've got to ask quickly about the flat earth topic, and I'm curious if, kind of given how widespread that idea is rejected into, the majority of the population, it seems ridiculous. Is it a little bit of a funner topic to handle as opposed to, dealing with something that's a little bit more potential to be commonly accepted, or do you kind of...
It's fun because it's like simple geometry. Most of the stuff that you're doing in it, you're saying how high should the horizon be, and how much of this building would be obscured by the horizon if you're at a certain distance. And you see a lot of people getting into flat earth debunking just because it is that there's fun little tasks like trying to debunk these things. But a lot of the people who are doing flat earth promotion, they're essentially trolling. They're not really seriously engaging on the subject. They're just putting out things like the NASA images of Earth are all faked because, like, we saw this blue marble image being created in Photoshop. So that means every single satellite image is fake. And then people will point out, well, actually, no, there's all these live images from the Himawari satellite and the GOES 17 and 18 satellites, which do a full disk image of the Earth every 10 minutes, and you can download it whenever you like. And they just don't engage. It's because they're not really interested in reality. They're interested in promoting their story, which maybe they think there's something to it, but it's almost like a religion to them. They don't,
Right.
If it's a Christian apologist who's talking, you're not going to be able to tell them things like, oh, well, maybe Jesus wasn't a historical figure and here's some evidence, because they're not interested in that. They know that Jesus was a historical figure and they just want to tell you about the good news. So it's a fun thing to engage with, Flat Earth, but it's also a little frustrating because you don't get through to the people who are talking about it. And there's very few people who are genuinely confused about the issue.
Oh, that makes sense. All right, I've got to move into UFOs briefly. I'm going to just kind of talk about my perspective on this because I think it's relevant for context. If I had to state a position, I do feel like there is enough legitimacy to the alien hypothesis to at least merit further discussion and investigation. You have to realize this is a hard thing to tell the world's most prominent UFO debunker.
It's definitely a reasonable position.
Yeah, I certainly have no solid confidence that that's the case. I'm very open to information disputing it, and I think I actively look out information disputing it. If I had to pinpoint what keeps me most on the hook for being curious about that, it's just the long-standing predominance of a lot of witness testimony. Stan Friedman in the early 90s did a lot of interviews that I found very compelling with people that I just really cannot envision having a reason to lie about that or an agenda. There's the Philip Morris story, stuff like that. But admittedly, I also think my interest to begin with it is very rooted in 90s pop culture. I grew up in the 90s, right? So this is kind of the time of Unsolved Mysteries and Outer Limits, and especially the X-Files. And I am acutely aware of how messy and incredibly weird the topic gets. You talk in your book about kind of that line of demarcation concept, and where that falls on the spectrum, and being able to dissuade somebody of something because of, you have people that somebody is listening to that is also advocating for these other topics, right? We see this with Skinwalker Ranch all the time. I've never seen anything, it's always interesting watching. I've never seen anything that I felt is truly compelling with Skinwalker Ranch. The ongoing reliance on what they call evidence, right? And we'll talk about the gimbal video. I feel, especially out of the three prominent modern videos from the ones you've debunked, I think that the gimbal has definitely got the most legs as being solidly debunked. And we still see that on news stories all the time about UFOs. And then also, just these people, there's these, quote unquote, prominent and respected ufologists. Richard Dolan and Linda Moulton Howe were both involved in that citizens hearing on disclosure in the early 2010s, which was basically a mock congressional hearing. Maybe Richard Dolan to a lesser extent, but then I seen during COVID, he had some theories, which personally I was, radically turned off. And then Linda Moulton Howe, if you watch her talk on her show, I get the sense that anybody can tell her anything, and she's buying it and then reselling it, which is a little, it's off-putting. But when it comes down to it, regardless of what the truth is, I just find the topic is incredibly interesting, especially what we would call modern ufology, kind of post the 2017 New York Times interview and story, with Lou Elizondo and David Grush in congressional hearings, and this Schumer legislation. If there is nothing, like absolutely zero relevancy to anything, not necessarily paranormal, but anything unique scientifically, I guess, it still would be incredibly fascinating to me to know what the background is and why those, how those topics came to be. So I want to talk, I guess, about your perspective. And I think from what I've seen, the most comprehensive summary was an article you had wrote for Reason magazine, which was called the Military UFO Complex in late 2022. So kind of my understanding of your perspective is that there is a hybrid of kind of a cult-like interest of this topic perpetuated by the same core group for, maybe 50 plus years, the Hal Puthoffs and Jacques Vallée and Bob Bigelow's of the world, and this kind of sucking in, these government officials and interested journalists, kind of paired with legitimate concerns of flight safety, and then a desire from bad actors to monetize that hype. Is that pretty accurate to say where you would coming from as a summary?
Yeah, I think it's complicated, and that's certainly a lot of aspects of it. But a lot of ufology, of course, is just down to like people see UFOs in the sky and they report them, and they think that there's something amazing, and so you've got this vast kind of body of experience that has happened, and that's kind of the underlying thing that really drives everything at root. Like even if you go back to Jacques Vallée, who's this French scientist, very big in UFOs. His stuff is all about gathering evidence. So he gathers all this testimony, eyewitness testimony mostly, Robert Bigelow, he tries to gather evidence at Skinwalker Ranch. So it's not simply people have an opinion and they're trying to force that opinion on people, which would be kind of like almost like a cult-like thing. It's it's a real phenomena in that we do see unidentified things in the sky that we can't figure out what they are, and that gets interpreted by different people in different ways. My interpretation of these strange things that people see in the sky is that they probably don't have aliens as a cause. And, I've kind of explained why I think that, just because, my experience so far in looking into every single thing is that it doesn't turn out to be aliens, or it turns out we don't have enough information. But other people have a belief that it is actually aliens. And I'm using the term aliens loosely. It could include time travelers or interdimensional beings or whatever. I don't want to say it's like just the typical grey aliens. There's various possibilities, but some kind of non-human intelligence or future humans or something like that. Some people are very convinced that that's what's going on, and they want to convince other people that that's going on. And so they're promoting a way of looking at the topic that is kind of predicated upon that belief. So they're saying, well, we know that there are these amazing craft that do these things in the air and they're running around our planes, and we know this already. So what we've got to do is try to study that thing. But the problem I have with that is that we don't know that. We don't actually have very good evidence that any of this stuff is actually happening. You look at the reports, like even from the UAP task force, they say that there are some that seem to do things that are interesting, but it could be sensor error, it could be spoofing, it could be operator misperceptions, and then there's other things as well, like reporting bias and equipment malfunctions, and it could be these other things. We don't know anything for sure. So we don't have what people say we have. All these people who are pushing this UFO narrative are saying there are these incredible things flying around in our airspace, and so let's do the next step. But they haven't done the first step. They haven't actually established that these things are there, and yet they're acting as if they are, and they're persuading people in government to do things. Like Tim Bichette gets persuaded that there is amazing things going on. Anna Paulina Luna, she's been seemingly persuaded. Gillibrand even she thinks it's more likely to be Chinese drones or something, but I think she's been convinced that there's something amazing going on, where it's probably not. We don't actually have good evidence of something amazing going on, and so they're all acting from their own perspectives, and I think most of them are acting in good faith, but they're also acting from a very biased position with good faith, because they think that aliens are behind all this. They're framing everything in that context, and they're trying to move forward in that context. Like, how do we get the truth about aliens out? And how do we make contact with the aliens? And how do we study the aliens? When really we've got to get back to the first step. How do we demonstrate that there's something amazing going on?
Yeah, actually, interesting as you've kind of brought up the members of Congress. I've heard Tim Burchett talk about, we've seen, the satellite imagery and these things that we're not allowed to talk about publicly. Do you put any stock in that, or is that kind of a just thing where, again, they might be coming from too heavy of a bias to understand what they're seeing? No, I think, that there's so many things get promised, and then when they either don't come out, or when they do come out, they're disappointing. Think of the stuff that what's his name, Jeremy Corbell releases. This filmmaker who's been promoting the UFO narrative for many years, and his mentor George Knapp many years before that. Yeah, they've got podcasts, they've got a website, and they say things like, amazing new footage coming soon, like best case ever witnessed by 50 Marines at military base, like giant triangular shaped craft
hovering,
and then it turns out to be flares and stars.
Exactly. It turns out to be that one was just flares. And they said, we've had this footage for 2 years, and now we're finally ready to reveal it. And it's like they reveal it. They're like, people are like, that looks like flares. And then let me just check. Yeah, there's flares. And it's like it was done in a day. And so what are people doing? And that's Jeremy Corbell, obviously, but that type of thing applies within the military. There was this green triangle thing, which was released by Jeremy Corbell, but it was a real UFO video. The green triangle video there was 3 videos actually. They didn't know what they were looking at. And it's kind of worse than it seems. Like the video Corbell released didn't have any audio, but the 2 other videos that got released when the military released it, they have audio. And it's like Snoopy Team Leader, like we're looking at like 3 drones, unidentified aerial systems, and they're hovering like 300 feet off the bow. And it's pointing the camera up in the sky at 3 stars. And we know they're stars because you can see other stars around them and you can figure out the constellations and stuff. So 100% that they are stars. And then the military, they say at this hearing, Scott Bray comes out and says, we solved this case. We had these videos. And then several years later, someone took another video and we figured out it was just an artifact of the camera. So you've got the government, like within UFO videos, taking several years to figure out things that should have taken like 20 minutes or so.
Right.
There's this vast amount of, inadequacy in the government's investigation of UFOs. So Tim Burchett coming out and saying, we saw this amazing video of something from a satellite image. I mean, he could have been just looking at, say, that Middle East sphere, which is, drone footage. You're looking down. It kind of looks a bit like satellite footage, and it whizzes into the scene and then, flies off again. It's probably just a balloon. It's probably just the parallax from the motion of the Reaper drone, which is going at 150 miles per hour. You show that to Tim Burchett, and somebody gives it to him and says, "Look, here's a silver orb. There's no visible means of propulsion. It's moving super fast, and it's in a war zone. It's a big concern." And Burchett, politician, goes out and he says, I've seen things, and there's beyond our technology. It's doing things that we can't imagine. I very much doubt that he's actually seen anything, doing anything that's unambiguously amazing.
Okay, fair enough. I've got a couple of quick, maybe case studies that I want to look at and kind of get your thoughts on from different perspectives. So, your Tales from the Rabbit Hole podcast episode 52, you had Lou Elizondo on, and I appreciate that he was willing to come on the podcast and have a discussion. And he said he's got an awareness of your perspective and where you were coming from. I was definitely disappointed with not necessarily just a lack of justifiable response to your evaluations of those, the 3 prominent modern videos, but he didn't really seem to even understand the concept that was proposed, specifically with the gimbal video. And this was kind of echoed, David Fravor did an interview with Lex Friedman in 2020, and I would say kind of the lack of understanding of that rotating glare concept, that it was similar there. And I'm curious if you've ever had a response from, whether it's from someone prominent or not, to your hypothesis with that the glare concept from that gimbal video that actually demonstrates an understanding of what you are saying, and maybe disputes it with some justifiability, even if it's not something that you would agree with the retort.
Yeah, no, that's actually a big problem. Yeah, with gimbal, the big issue with gimbal is that it's actually quite complicated, and the explanation is quite complicated, and understanding what's going on kind of requires a level of abstraction that just your average person, you wouldn't expect them to have. Because we're talking about, the camera rotates, and that makes the glare rotate in this video. This is the big explanation. We're looking at an infrared, like the back end of a jet engine or something like that, and the camera's rotating, and so the glare rotating. And everyone was like, well, if the camera's rotating, why is just the glare rotating? Why doesn't the horizon rotate? Which obviously you'd expect. You move a camera and everything in the scene rotates, which is true. But the explanation for that is it sounds simple. You can say it simply, like the orientation of the glare is fixed to the camera. So when you rotate the camera, everything in the scene rotates, but the glare doesn't rotate. because it just stays in the same position relative to the camera. But what we're looking at, the scene isn't rotating, but we know the camera's rotating. The scene isn't rotating. So why is that? It turns out there's they had to mount the camera this way, is facing forward, because they need to do it because these jets go at Mach 2, so they can go super fast. I don't think they can quite go to Mach 2, but they can go faster than the speed of sound. So you got a jet going zipping along incredibly fast. You can't have a little dome camera underneath it. So they have them like torpedoes underneath the wings or on the fuselage. But that creates limitations in how it can rotate. It can only rotate round and round and up and down, which means that to track something, it actually has to rotate when it goes from left to right. But the image, you don't want the image to rotate. So they've got another thing in the back of the camera, safe in the innards of it, that puts the image the right way up. And because it's doing that, you've got first of all, you get a video where the scene rotates but the glare doesn't, and then you get that kind of reversed. The scene doesn't rotate, the glare does rotate. Now, that all took me a couple of minutes to explain, and a lot of people won't get it because it's quite complicated. You can't really, if you don't really understand much about cameras and images and video and stuff.
Yeah, and I think it's fair for most people not to get it, but somebody who's been kind of the main, I would have expected him to at least understand the concept, whether he could dispute it or not, but to be able to understand, what you're explaining, in the role that he held. Yeah. I would hope that if it at least would have been on the table.
Well, I think to be fair, at that moment, it was a concept he hadn't heard of before, and which, that's a red flag in itself. But any regular person, no matter how smart, it takes them a while for it to get through their brain and to understand what's actually going on. I have to do these little demonstrations. I'm always shining my flashlight at the camera and saying, "Look, this is glare," and then doing little rotation experiments to demonstrate it. And it's difficult to comprehend. So for Lou to not get it in the moment is perfectly understandable. He's a pretty smart guy. I'm sure he could get it eventually. But the issue there is that he was unaware of it, which means that any investigation that was done back then for the ATIP group or ORSAP, they were probably unaware of it as well. So they were. I don't know if he would have actually investigated that one. But the UAP task force, people like that, if they don't understand it either, then they're not going to actually solve the case, because you need to go in that direction. And I think that there's kind of a unwillingness to expend a lot of effort in doing this. This first step that I talked about, this thing where you demonstrate that something amazing is going on. So you get people investigating UFOs, assuming that they're doing something amazing. So with the gimbal video, they're assuming that this is a flying saucer and it's standing on its end and it's got this glow around it. So it must be some kind of gravitational lensing or something like that, and some kind of anti-gravity device. And the glow is the warping of space-time, making things look cold. But they haven't actually demonstrated that it's not just a jet in the distance. They're just leaping past that, and they're not doing the work to actually investigate that hypothesis. And I've been told that the UAP task force, led by Jay Stratton, kind of didn't really want to get into that type of thing. They didn't want to get into things like reconstructing gimbal or doing simulations of gimbal. They just wanted to keep it as a mysterious case. They didn't really want to solve it, because solving cases means that there's nothing to look into. If they've got their golden boy cases, these amazing cases that are the foundation of the belief of so many people, you don't want to disabuse that belief by debunking them. So I think maybe not overtly, but there was certainly a reluctance to look into them in any depth.
Right. Yeah, I definitely found that, I would have thought for how many times he's had a discussion about that video, whether he was participating in directly investigating it or not, that he would have at some point, come across that concept and, had a discussion about it at least. Now, on the flip side, I want to talk about the David Grush response video that you had done right after News Nation aired their first special, where Ross Coulthart did the David Grush interview. You did the interview with News Nation impersonation on that post special, which admittedly, yeah, you definitely did not get a lot of time to go through much on there. So you did that YouTube video following up about, some of your thoughts that you didn't have time to speak about. So I want to take a look at a few of those points and discuss kind of the reception I had to each of those points watching that. And I think it's important to note these aren't, disputes that I seen come from somebody else. These were just thoughts I genuinely had watching it. And I'm curious to see if you feel like those points are worth a second consideration, but also if you feel like me questioning those points to, an unreasonable bias, I'm certainly willing to hear that. So first of all, when you talked about Dobster's role in, approving messaging versus whether they're clearing classified information, I had seen a different, I don't even remember where it was, somebody else speaking about that, not in response to what you had said. And the way they explained that, and it made sense, was Dobster's role is not to say we condone this information, we're verifying it, but just strictly to state that this is classified, you cannot speak about it, or what you're saying is not classified, you can speak about it. Where I think the impression I got from you was it was posed as either this messaging is endorsed by Dobster or it is untrue.
No, I mean, what you said there is essentially correct. I think Dobster is just making sure there's no classified material in whatever they're checking. Like, they do things like, say someone's in the intelligence community, they could leave and start writing spy novels, and they would write things based on their experience, and then they would have to get that spy novel cleared by Dobster. And it's all fiction, but it could make a reference to something that's like, classified program or something like that actually is classified and shouldn't be in that spy novel. And so Dobster, when they're given this, they'll read the novel, presumably, and they'll see, is there anything classified in here? And if there isn't, then they go, you go ahead. So someone writes a novel about how CIA invented a time gate, a Stargate, and they have a secret base on the moon. That's fine, because that's not classified because it didn't actually happen. Or if someone writes a novel about how we went to war with Iraq because we thought there were weapons of mass destruction, and it turns out there wasn't. That's fine too, because it's true and it's not classified. So all they're looking for is things that are classified. So the issue becomes is David Grush saying things that, if they were true, would be classified? Say, for example, we recovered a nuclear submarine from Russia, and we did it very secretly. We had a billionaire, Howard Hughes, build a boat specially just to recover this boat from this submarine from the bottom of the ocean, and we transport it to the naval base, and then we start studying it to figure it out. Would the existence of that program and the fact that we have a Russian submarine be classified? And I think the answer to that is that yes, it would. Now it's not. Now we know that it's actually something that actually happened. We don't know all the details of it, but we know that it's something that's happened. But at the time, they went through a lot of trouble to keep it secret. At the time, it was classified. Now, the idea that we have crashed alien spaceship, would that be classified? And I can't really see any scenario in which it wouldn't be classified, because it's something that gives us a vast technological advantage over other people. If we have this thing and we want to keep it all secret, we're not talking about it, no one's ever mentioned it before. Why is this fact of this reverse engineering program, the fact of us having these alien craft, and the even like things like hinting that we have agreements with alien races, if these things are secret enough that he can't tell us any of the details of them, why are they not so secret that he can't tell us about them at all?
No, that makes sense. So I guess the implication would be that if what he's saying without stating is that the concern is, if they said this is classified, you can't speak about it, that lends credibility to it in itself.
Well, we don't know what he's been told that he can't talk about, because he doesn't say what it is. So everything he's told us is unclassified. So all this stuff about aliens and programs going back to the 1940s and secret agreements with industry, it's all apparently unclassified, but somehow also the details are classified. So you can say, like, we've recovered alien craft. I just can't tell you which hangar it's in. It doesn't really make any sense. Now, the other thing that people raise is the idea that DOPSA doesn't know. And so because it's so deeply classified that these poor schmucks who work at DOPSA, who have these top-level clearances and are read into all of the programs, don't know about this one particular program. That doesn't really make sense either. Because if that was true, then he would have been able to give us all these details. Because it seems like he can tell us some things, but not other things, which means that they do know about those other things. Or they just, I don't know. There's something there he can't tell us. We don't know what it is.
Right. I'm curious. Do you know? Is there any restriction on somebody being able to say something? I can't speak about that because it's classified. When there's no justifiability to that, is there?
Well, making a lie about something being classified. I don't know what the answer to that would be. I mean, it sounds like you're making something up. Like if someone says something specific, there's a base on the moon, I can't tell you which crater it's in because the location of that crater is classified. Then I don't know if DOPSA would have an issue with that. I mean, other people might have an issue with that. Like the Pentagon might be like, you're lying, dude. And we've had some feedback like that from the Pentagon. Sean Kirkpatrick. He basically called out David Grush and he was very disappointed, and that stuff was deeply insulting, and that he has no knowledge whatsoever of such a program. General Mark Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the highest ranking person in the entire U.S. military, like kind of second in command to the president, said the same thing. He's like, I don't know what this guy's talking about, and he sounds like he's saying what he thinks is true, but me, the person who's in charge of the entire military, does not know anything about these programs. So it's a tough one. It's a tough claim to swallow from David Grush.
So I want to move just so you compared plane crash frequency on Earth to downed craft, and I realize I feel like I'm certainly playing devil's advocate to some degree by asking this, but I guess first of all, you'd kind of talked about a frequency of every 1 to 5 years being specific to alleged downed craft, and then talking about planes being kind of generally once a year. I took that as, I guess it could be argued that that's a very apples to oranges comparison, in the sense that the claim is that these craft are purpose built for certainly not I guess travel on the planet they're from. Again, I don't want to give the impression that I'm advocating that thought, but I think it's a question worth asking.
Well, I think it's kind of apples and oranges comparison, but really the other way. We're talking about an advanced alien race, and if you think compare, say, a Ford Model T with like a high-end Tesla right now. Tesla can basically drive itself anywhere you like, and it's probably a lot safer than humans, and the automatic ones very rarely crash. And any sufficiently advanced civilization is going to have automation, it's going to have AI, and it's going to have an understanding of the mechanical systems and the physics that's way in advance of that. So it's not just going to be like, the Model T to the Tesla. It's going to be the Model T to the Enterprise or something like that. It's going to be something that's so advanced and is so well controlled by the computers that the idea of it frequent crashes doesn't really make any sense. It's almost like they're taking the idea of flying saucers from like the science fiction of the 1950s. When a flying saucer would be something like, a pilot would have to get into, and he would have to turn these knobs and move these levers and things and adjust the thrusters, and I'm fighting with the gravity field. And that's all nonsense, because you would have computers doing that, and you would have systems that have been tried and tested for thousands of years that could do things like that. It just doesn't really seem to make any sense that they would be crashing all the time if they actually have advanced technology. It would seem if it's crashing, it's crappy technology, because there's less of them than there are of our big airliners, and yet it's crashing 100 times more frequently. So that aspect of it really doesn't make any sense.
Right. Part of me wants to say you couldn't take a Tesla and drive it on Jupiter, but I know exactly what
But
you're
design
saying.
it.
Right.
Is this the first planet they've ever been to? Yeah, we're talking about a civilization. Is it just happened to be this like bunch of renegade people who slapped together some anti-gravity drives in the junkyard, and they took off from their planet and arrived here, and then they had to make new anti-gravity drives out of rocks that they found on the seabed. I mean, you can come up with a narrative that works, I guess. But if we're talking about super advanced alien civilization, I think they'd have super advanced craft, and super advanced craft are not going to crash.
Yeah, I think that's a totally fair perspective to take. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about, I think when you talked about, he made comments about interdimensional travel, which, you posed as being science fiction. And I understand what you're saying, but I think the way I took those comments was, it was specifically as I'm not necessarily theorizing that this is interdimensional travel. I just want to be very clear that I don't want to denote origin.
Yeah, but that again is just the current UFO narrative. Ufologists, I mean, basically it's a Jacques Vallée thing. Jacques Vallée has these theories about interdimensional stuff, and so people who follow the scene, they're like, oh well, we don't want to like just pigeonhole things as being aliens coming over in flying saucers, and so everyone's picked up on this, and they're all just repeating the same thing, and I think he's repeating the same thing. He's got a degree in physics, and he completely messed up all the science he was talking about. Like he was talking about what he called the holographic principle, and the holographic principle is actually the idea that three-dimensional space or multidimensional space is actually encoded in lower dimensions, like a hologram. Like if you've got like a credit card, like I've got an old one here. They have these little holograms on. You move it around and it's got some 3 dimension to it, and you've seen other holograms, I'm sure, where it looks like really good 3 dimensions. We have a spotlight on it, it looks like it's 3 dimensions because it's all encoded. So he was saying it's a holographic principle, and then he described something which is the flatland interpretation. This great video by Carl Sagan on it, which is like if, say, the world was just a 2-dimensional sheet, and then there's a 3-dimensional object coming through it. You would see essentially slices through that, and so the 2-dimensional beings would see something appear and grow bigger and then grow smaller and then disappear as this 3-dimensional object passed through their space. And people posit that there could be 4-dimensional beings that kind of impinge 3-dimensional space in the same way, which is why something would go whoop into existence and then whoop disappear again, because it's actually shifting dimensions. Then the other dimensions that people talk about is almost like a completely different concept. But what David Grush was talking about, the holographic principle, is completely backwards to this idea of higher dimensions intersecting lower dimensions. The holographic principle is actually lower dimensions encoding higher dimensions. So lots of people pointed this out, that he's just repeating kind of almost like science fiction-y popular science tropes that don't really make any sense. And it's just his speculation on that particular point, but it's speculation it's Star Trek level speculation. It's not really scientific speculation.
Okay, I'll definitely have to take your word on that one, because I am very much not smart enough to be able to speak about certain principles like that. Okay, perfect. I think that's the last of my questions. And again, I do want to say thank you very much for taking the time. Again, not only do this is going to make for a great Find Time episode. I personally enjoyed the discussion very much. So your time is very much appreciated in doing this.
Thank you. It's fun conversation. Tony Hawk and aliens. We do have aliens in Tony Hawk, of course. We have an Area 51.
Yeah, that's what I thought. If we need some, I guess, promotional Twitter images for this, then that's probably where I would go. Indeed. With Tony Hawk skating Area 51,
jumping over the flying saucer.
Yeah, that's right. Well, thank you again, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.